like Two Voices, One Dialogue event. My name is Dr. Schulte. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach here at the Interfaith Initiative. And we are so pleased to have you here for our Rhythms of Understanding event. This is an event that has been more than 2 years in the making, and it is so exciting to see what has happened over the past couple of days, and we're very excited to have continuing the dialogue today as well, too. I also want to thank those of you who are joining us online through Facebook Live, so welcome. A couple of notes. For those for Facebook Live, we don't have the capacity at the moment to be taking questions through Facebook Live, but you are, of course, welcome to launch. One of the things I'll also mention is you came in, you should have hopefully picked up some index cards and a pen. What we'll do is we're going to have you, as we go through along, this towards the end of our conversation, we'll have some time for discussions, and I'm going to have you pass those index, you'll write down your questions and pass them up to Ronnie here, and then Ronnie will bring them up here, and I'll go through, and what we have time we'll get to for questions that way towards the end. So I want to give an introduction to our guest speakers here. I'm going to start on my far left. We have Dr. Abla Hasan, who is Professor of Practice in Arabic Language and Culture at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. With a PhD in Philosophy of Language, she specializes in Quranic studies, Islamic feminist thought, and hermeneutics. A native speaker of Arabic, she is the author of Decoding the Egalitarianism of the Quran and On Pain and Suffering, a Quranic Perspective, among other works. Awards for her teaching and justice scholarship include UNL's Distinguished Teaching Award and Women's and Gender Justice Award. And I'd also like to introduce Rabbi Dr. Reuven Firestone, who is the Regenstein Professor of Medieval Judaism and Islam at Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles, an affiliate professor of religion at the University of Southern California, an ordained rabbi with a PhD in Arabic and Islamic studies from New York University. He has authored numerous books, including Who Are the Real Chosen People?, Introduction to Islam for Jews, and The Power of Dialogue. Dr. Firestone has served as Vice President of the Association for Jewish Studies and President of the International Quranic Studies Association. He's a widely respected voice in interfaith scholarship and dialogue. So please help me in welcoming our guests today. So I wanted to start off a question for both of you, give you each a chance to answer this. What are you looking forward to about our discussion today, and what are some of your hopes for today?
I think we're starting with the guests. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation, and welcome to Nebraska. Rabbi Firestone, so honored to be part of this conversation. To be honest, when my dear friend Dr. Luke talked to me a while ago about having this conversation, I didn't even think that we're going to be meeting, celebrating ending the war in Gaza. So congratulations to all of us. Congratulations to Israeli mothers reunited with their kidnapped kids, to Palestinian mothers who won't see their kids starving anymore. It's a time to celebrate, it's a time to rejoice, but also it's a time to reflect, learn a lesson, and think of how we move forward. There is a lot to be considered. Personally, through my career, it's a time to renew our faith in humanity, in religion, and in religious texts, and in all of us. It's a happy time. I didn't believe that we're going to be talking about this. We have hope now, and we want to keep it. Thank you for organizing this, Luke. It's to keep an interfaith dialogue. It's important. It's been always important, and it's going to always be important. Thank you. Amen.
via Zoom about how we would approach this, and we didn't discuss this issue. And I realized earlier, and because I was late, I didn't get a chance to ask you if we could at least raise the issue. And that is, and I want to say to everyone that I'm grieving for all of the lost life among my brothers and sisters in Palestine, especially in Gaza, but in other areas as well. And I'm getting a little emotional, so I'm starting out this way. This is not so good to say that. But I've always wondered why and how it is that people cannot grieve for both sides of the conflict. There's so much suffering, and we should have enough open our hearts to deal with the suffering. So, thank you, and I'll get it together in a moment, so I'll be right back.
So, the next question I have is, what is perhaps one aspect of your conversation partner's religion that you most admire? Does this relate to any aspects of your own religious tradition in which you would like to see growth or change?
Could you ask the question again?
Sure.
I'm not sure if I quite grasped it.
What is something that you admire about Islam? And is that aspect that you admire about Islam related to something that you would like to see maybe growth or change in your own tradition? And then for Abla, is there something, what do you admire most about Judaism? And likewise, is it related to something you would like to see growth or change in your own religious tradition too?
Where do I begin? There's so much in Islam that I admire. I admire the search for truth that I feel is so strong there, and the kind of piety that I see, true piety that I see in the text and in there's a tradition. There are a lot of traditions in Islam that I wish we also had in Judaism. One of them is a tradition that's attributed to the Prophet that says, seek truth wherever you can find it. I think even if you go to China, seek truth. And it's just a beautiful way to say something that I think we have in all of our traditions. This is not to exclude Christianity or Judaism from the search for truth, but the openness and I would say almost kind of innocent connection with spirituality and an attempt really, really not to allow your ego to get in the way is something that I see in Islam. It's very, very strong, and it's kind of religious culture that is there. I admire very much.
Thank you so much. This is so beautiful. When Ru shared with me that this could be one of the questions, I didn't have to second guess or think about it. You have a holiday in Judaism, I hope I pronounce it right, Yom Kippur. And I've been fascinated by Yom Kippur for a long time. I mean the idea of a reflective holiday, right? This is so fascinating, so inspiring, and I do believe, and this is a stretch maybe of imagination, but if we can all, humanity, all faith, if we can have a Yom Kippur day, where we reflect on what we did the last year, we think of what we did while we're thinking of the future. Even, for example, with the New Year resolution, we think of the New Year, but we don't think of what we did last year. I see it very inspiring, especially when we take into consideration our lifestyle. It's what I call the hamster wheel lifestyle. It's always something to do, always something. It's like, I complained once to my advisor. I told him, sometimes I feel my life is like I'm working in a fast food restaurant, order after order. I'm done with something, I need to do something else. So to pause, get out of everything just to reflect and think, we all need that. We're all guilty of doing that. Abstaining from eating and drinking as well, this is something that's shared with the Ramadan month in Islam. And many people think of it as a punishment, right? Really, not even drinking for a whole day, sunrise to sunrise. sunset, and I think it's also the case for newcomer. You're becoming more close to your angelic nature by doing that. Yes, it's tough, it's hard, but those who can change themselves, those who can control themselves, can reach out to others, and they can hope for change. Unless we control ourselves, we won't be able to control or change anything. So this is shared, with one exception. We eat a lot during Ramadan. It's kind of a festival of here's the thing, the Arab cuisine is really good. Probably you know, Reuven. So we celebrate Ramadan with a lot of things, including the iftar meal needs to be very special and well organized, and we invite people. So maybe a long answer to the question, but as you can tell, I'm fascinated with this tradition. I hope all of us we can share it.
Thank you both. I want to do one really brief follow-up on that too, to share an admiration I have, particularly from an interfaith perspective, that I've come to very much appreciate about Islam and about Judaism briefly, before we go into more detailed question. One of the things that I very much, among many things I admire about Islam, is aspects of possibilities for interfaith, such as there should be no compulsion in matters of religion. And this idea of competing with each other in the works of respecting all the different kinds of traditions and backgrounds that we have been created to be different from each other, that is the way that we're created. And I think there's so much to rely upon for interfaith engagement to that. And within Judaism, one of the things I learned many, many years ago in a taste of Judaism when I was an undergrad and went to South Street Temple in Lincoln as an undergrad, was learning from the rabbi about this tradition of, particularly in the early rabbinic period, but I see that even today, of the great rabbis arguing throughout the day and at night marrying each other's children to each other. And that idea of being able to hold differences of opinion and still be family together. I find that one of the great admirations that I have about Judaism as well. So I hope to hear more from each of you as we continue along with this as well. But I wanted to turn over to a distinct question for each of you that will be a little bit more in depth and invite each other to ask questions during that as well, I hope. But I want to start with Reuven. As a scholar specializing in medieval Judaism and Islam, can you give us an overview of the history of Jewish-Muslim relations? What do you consider the most important aspects of that history for us to understand?
Yeah, that's a big question. And a controversial one. There are two myths about this relationship that I think are important to just put out on the table at the very beginning. One myth is that it was horrible and Jews suffered under the foot of Islam. This was just a terrible suffering minority religion under a majority, very powerful majority. That is an incorrect view of history. That's not what happened. The other, also incorrect, is that everything was really fine. And Jews just lived very happily as a minority in the Muslim world. They didn't live so happily as a minority in the Christian world, but they lived happily as a minority in the Muslim world. That's also not so true. So let me try to unpack that a little bit and then give some specifics in relation to, I think, Jewish-Muslim relations. First of all minorities suffer. You just have to remember that. That's a phenomenology of the human condition. Minorities, especially when they're in a truly democratic situation where minority rights are truly respected and protected, which is rare in human history, minorities always suffer. Jews happen to be a minority for a very long time in very many places. So in relation to other minorities, they did suffer more, but they suffered over a longer duration in more locations. Most minorities die out and are no longer minorities. They become assimilated into the culture, or they leave and they become a majority somewhere else, and then they persecute another minority. So that's sort of part of the human condition as well. In the Jewish world, up until the modern time, Jews remained and didn't lose their identity as a minority, and they recorded their lives, and therefore they recorded the kind of suffering of minorities. So if you were to measure Jewish suffering in relation to the suffering of, you name it, any minority anywhere, and look at it over the long haul, I don't think Jews suffered any more than anyone else ever at any time. I mean, there were sometimes they suffered more, sometimes less, so do all minorities. In relation to Islam specifically, let me also be clear about something else. I've written about this a lot in scholarly, and so let me just be very clear at the outset. The Quran is not anti-Semitic. Okay? Let's just put that out on the table at the beginning. Although there are some negative references to Jews, antipathy toward Jews in the Quran, as there are toward other minorities in the Quran who were perceived as being threatening, I think, to the success of the very early movement. You see this also in the New Testament. You see this also in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. This is the kind of phenomenology of religion. When a new religion emerges into history, some people have come to one or more of my talks and have heard this before. When a new religion comes into history, the old religions are always threatened by it. And they always try, if the new religion is successful and attracting new people, where are they coming from? Very often they're coming from the heart of the old religion. And people don't want to lose their children to a new religion, particularly a religion that they don't know anything about. And so Jews, yes, oppose the emergence of Islam. And that's recorded. The Quran refers to it. The early Muslim tradition literature refers to it. It happened. It's normal. So we can turn this always on its head. Muslims should historically have also opposed the emergence of new religions that come out of Islam. The Baha'i tradition, for example, and other traditions. That's a normal part, maybe unfortunate, but a normal part of religious tradition. So the negative references to Jews in the Quran and in the early Muslim tradition, Jews have to understand is a normal part of life. It's not great, particularly from a Jewish perspective, it's not good, but it's life. And there's no inherent anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism in the Quran, because the Jews of the Quran were not the only community that opposed the Prophet. There were Christians, there were pre-Islamic Arabs who were neither Jewish nor Christian, some of them with a religion we don't really know, but they're usually called just pagans, right? And all of those communities are referred to negatively in the Quran. But when you look at the Quranic reference to those who felt opposed it, if you will, or the new movement, you have to look at always in perspective. So in the Hebrew Bible, there's a lot of negativity directed toward the pre-biblical communities that were threatened by the emergence of this Israelite religion. And in the New Testament, you see lots of references to all kinds of communities, some Jewish, some Christian, that didn't go along with the program. So it's a complicated thing. That's only the early period. And look how much I've spoken already. So in the history, there has always been a lot of cooperation, because Jews and Muslims, like Jews and Christians and Muslims, have always found a lot in common with one another. So it moves up and down and up and down. Let me just mention that Jews had a particular problem with Islam that they did not have with Christianity. And that is that the theology of Muslim thinking about God was, and continues to be, extremely close to the theology the Jews had regarding the monarchy of God, as opposed to Christianity, which is different. So, in the Christian world, Jews were less likely to convert out, because from the Jewish perspective, the Trinitarian nature of God was not monotheism, could not be understood as monotheism. So Jews who wanted to leave the minority status and become part of the majority culture and gain more rights in the Christian world were more likely to do so than, were less likely to do so than in the Muslim world. Because in the Muslim world, there was no problematic theology inherently in Islam. The problem with Islam from the Jewish perspective was a new scripture that threatens the traditions and the rules of the old scripture, and the tradition that claims the new scripture abrogates or overrules the old tradition. That's what is problematic, but no theology. And that's very interesting. So the beauty of the similarity between Judaism and Islam was itself threatening the Jewish community. So throughout the period of time, Muslims and Jews recognized that, and there were periods when Jews and Muslims had open discourse, like the famous case in Baghdad under the Abbasid caliphs. There was a thing called the Majlis, a place where people came together, Jews and Muslims and also Christians, to speak about their own theology and to argue their positions and to learn from one another through that. It's something extraordinary. You don't find that in most of the Middle Ages. Not among Christians, not among Muslims, right? And also, certainly not among Jews. So we see it's complicated. Just be careful when you listen to people who simplify, there's a word for this, oversimplify relations in a single sentence, because historical relationships between communities are always complicated. I hope that's been. We can continue this conversation, but I've spoken enough, so let's move on.
So, Abla, I'm going to ask you, as a scholar of the Quran, can you give us an overview of perspectives within the Quran about relations among different religions in general, and anything particularly about Jewish-Muslim relations? And in what way do these Quranic perspectives relate to the history of Jewish-Muslim relations?
Yes, absolutely. Like through my academic career, I've been known as a Quranic scholar. I like all the time to go to the scripture itself. Check what does the scripture say about this and that. Investigating the gap between the tradition and what the scriptures actually say. I'm not going to go through the reality and historicity of the Jewish Islamic relations. Rabbi Reuven did that such a eloquent way. There is a saying in Arabic I like. They say, "La yufta wa maliku fil Medina." You don't give fatwa when an authority on something is in the city, right? Like Malik was an authority. So I can't speak about anything after Rabbi Reuven. But I can go back to my comfort zone and I can share a little bit. What does the Quran say before the real application of it? So let's go back to the theory before the bad and the good in the Islamic history took place. Because at the end of the day, there are no sacred histories. There are just people trying to interpret religions different ways and apply them different ways. There's the good, the bad, the right interpretation, and the wrong interpretation. And so many people, progressive and liberal voices, they think generally, and I'm going to limit myself to Islam and Quran, this is my expertise, that to fix the problems with our modern life, let's take a step away from religious texts. We're going to be on the safe side. When you go and to check sometimes the text, you realize the problem is not in the text. It was in the history of interpreting and misinterpreting the text. So when we go back to the Quran, for example, when it comes to the relation between monotheistic Abrahamic traditions, I see this call to a global faith community. Islam, and probably you've heard this so many times, stands for the submission to God. It stands for the belief in one God. And there are still so many paths, so many ways of doing that. What I see in the Quran is Judaism, Christianity, Islam, even Sapiens, any belief in one God could be equally ways to the same God. Now, was it applied through history? through the, and this is something I shared with Rabbi Reuven before, like Muslims, like anyone else, everyone else, during the expansion of the Arab Empire, they had to use religion as an umbrella to unify their state, to unify their empire, and it was the Islam for them. So we had kind of this arguments for the supremacy of Islam, and I mean the Islam as the followers of Muhammad movement. Because when you go back to the Quran, and this is something, if you give me the whole day, I'll be talking about it, because my third book, The Quranic Dilemma, is about that. When you go back to the meaning of Islam itself, there's a difference between Islam, the way historians use the term. It stands for the followers of Muhammad. This is the movement started in Eastern Arabia, 7th century. And there is the Quranic meaning of Islam, which is the monotheistic Abrahamic path. So in the Quran, all the prophets, starting from Adam, including Moses and Jesus, are considered Muslims. All the followers are Muslims. It's the submission to God. It was later on narrowed down to be a Muslim means you're choosing Muhammad only as your prophet. You're reaching God through that one choice. But in Islam, in the Quran, Islam is the submission to God. There is one story in the Quran, one of my favorite stories, the story of Prophet or King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Solomon, we know, is a Jewish prophet, but in the Quran is referred to as Muslim. He challenged the Queen of Sheba, or Al-Malika Balqis, as the Arabic name for her. And she ends up, she was a very smart woman, and she challenged her with supernatural things, and she realized he must be aided by a supernatural power, and she ends the story by saying, I'm a Muslim now, which means it's the submission to God. You tell me when to stop. I'm still good. Other questions could be about a big issue, like problematic passages in the Quran about Jews and Christians, right? Sometimes, yes, as Rabbi Reuven mentioned, sometimes you see negative way of portraying or criticizing some acts done by some Jews and some Christians. So the question is, how can we interpret polemic passages in the Quran? I had 2 years ago the honor of sharing a paper presentation in a Interfaith conference about this. And this is something also I investigate in my book, The Quranic Dilemma. So if we go deep into polemic passages in the Quran, we can understand they're not polemic at all. If we understand what was Muhammad's message, or the way his message was understood in the Quran, or the way he understands his own message in the Quran. So, if we're talking about Islam as a global faith-based community, Muhammad never preached a new religion. He was purifying corruption in previous religions, and he was, according to Islam, and this is why Muslims, you hear Muslims saying this is a universal religion, right? He was not only talking to pre-Islamic Arabs, but he was talking to humanity through talking to pre-Islamic Arabs. So it's a message, I know it's a brave claim, it's a huge claim, it's a message that should be flexible enough to respond to the needs of all humans, all cultures, all religions, as long as the condition of believing in one God is fulfilled. So why I'm starting with this introduction? Now I'm going to go from it to criticizing some Jews and some Christians, contemporaries of Muhammad at the time. Muhammad never thought of himself as an outsider critic. He thought of himself, the message assigned to him in the Quran was him as an insider reformer to all Abrahamic faiths. So it means he criticized sometimes things, and it's not, a generic, I would say, abrogation of Christianity and Judaism, because he could have said it. Let's abrogate all previous scriptures, get done with that. I'm not there quoting, but these are literally verses in the Quran telling the Jews and Christians, you want to be righteous until you go back to your books. It's not saying you abrogate your books, you abandon your books, you follow only the Quran, saying check what you have in your books. So what I want to say, following passages were addressing heresies within Judaism and Christianity. It was not addressing or going after Judaism and Christianity. Now, this sounds too ideal to us today. Why? Because when we go back read the Quran, this happens to Muslims and to others, we read it only in a retrospective way. We read it after we process all later interpretations done through centuries of reading this book. Politics is involved there. The need to serve the needs of politicians and caliphs. And not to deny it, caliphs were really successful in what they did. They expanded in such a massive way. But they were not messengers, right? They had their own interpretation supported by their own clergy. So therefore, when we go back to the Quran now, we see ourselves kind of alienated from the message. Sometimes it's too egalitarian, gender egalitarian. Sometimes it's too liberal. No, it was like that. We need a new way, I would say, a brave way in each community of going back to the text and rethinking them for what they say. So there are following passages in the Quran. They're not addressed to all Jews or Christians, but the corrupt among them. For example, I'll give you an example. The Quran will criticize some scribers who write scriptures and get paid for corrupting some of their writing. So it's not going after everyone, it's going after wrongdoers. The other thing, Muhammad not only criticized the wrongdoers among Jews and Christians, he did that with his fellow believers. There's a verse, for example, in the Quran, "Oh believers, why do you say things you don't do?" So he saw himself as a new leader, the head of the state, kind of leading an interfaith community, and he had the right of criticizing everyone because he was kind of responsible for everyone. There is a verse, and I'm going to end with this in the Quran, a very interesting verse. It says, وَلَمْ تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. It says, a prophet, Jews and Christians won't be satisfied with you fully, happy with you fully, until you follow them. Which means the idealistic prophet, Muhammad, not only he wanted to have a good relations with them, he wanted to have everyone on the same page. And the Quran wanted to tell him, you won't have everyone on the same page. You're trying your best, but it won't be the case. It seems he was very excited, right? It's a human tendency we see with all prophets. I hope this wasn't too long.
Thank you. One of the questions that comes to mind to ask both of you is, with hearing some more of the background that you're bringing from the historical interactions and from the Quran, I wonder about what gives you hope for the future. I mean, let me ask it this way. How can having an understanding, a deeper understanding of the complexities of history, of the Quran, that you've given to us today, help us to build better Jewish-Muslim relations, particularly, and interfaith relations in general?
Well, forums like this can be hope for the future, because here we have Christians, Muslims, and Jews together, talking to one another, sometimes arguing. There's nothing wrong with arguing. That's very much part of our tradition. As we mentioned earlier, argue about everything, but stay friends. It's easier said than done, and when there's nothing at stake, then of course that's also makes it easier. But when you have issues at stake and power that's associated with one side or another, that always makes it much more difficult. In a truly democratic society in which minorities are protected, then you have the opportunity for people to feel safe and they can learn from one another. I have found in my own experience that I have deepened my spiritual sense of self by speaking to Muslims and Christians, because there are differences between Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and each tradition manages to catch a bit of that very difficult, something that's very difficult to grasp, which is the essence of spirituality of what it means to be a human in this very complicated world under one God. None of us all get it right. So we can learn from the great successes of some of the others. Now, I know what I'm about to say is a bit controversial, but and some of our religious traditions would disagree with me, but when I look at our three Abrahamic faith traditions, I see them as human responses to the ultimate of the divine. That is, the structure, the way we organize our religious communities is determined by people, not by God. God didn't say that a religious leader needs to be called an imam, or a mufti, or a bishop, or a rabbi. These are words that were taken on by communities themselves to try to understand and how to define our hierarchies within our own religious traditions. And our interpretive traditions, how we interpret Scripture, these are all human responses to I guess you could say, a constant flow of the divine in the world as we understand it. So many of the foibles, many of the problems that we have within our religious traditions are normal problems of humans living together, not only between our traditions, but within our traditions. Issues of power, issues of hierarchy, gender, sexual issues, all kinds of jealousies, greed. And our religious leaders are human too, and have all the foibles of everyone else. But when we want to deny this, or we want to try to not accept this because it seems so problematic for us, sometimes we don't see it, even in our own traditions, but we can see it in the traditions of the other, so we critique the other. When it's just a normal part of human life to have these problems in communities. So, in my view, arguing is good. You just have to be friends at the end, and be able to marry our children together. And it doesn't have to be, just between our own traditions.
Thank you so much. I also see hope in the future. And I think to start a successful, or to hope for a successful interfaith dialogue, we need to start with a successful interfaith dialogue. So we need to solve issues within each faith before we reach out to the other, whoever the other is. I'm going to speak about Islam and my experience working in the faith for a while. Like, speaking about the way Islamic studies is done in the West. Like, for a while it's been polarized between two directions. There is either the apologetic direction. There is nothing wrong with Muslims, all of them. Islamic history is a sacred history, right? There's nothing to be negotiate or argue for, right? Even among Muslim scholars themselves. Or there is on the other side, the opposite. There is the Orientalist, neo-Orientalist, and even Islamophobic approach to Islamic studies. There is nothing fixable in Islam, right? It's all about violence, radical groups, right? And we see nothing in between or the objective way of introducing Islam in the West or among Muslims themselves. They're kind of lost between the two poles. And I understand the urge for that because it's no secret Islamophobia is on the rise in the West. So many scholars, they think, let's keep the discussions aside. Let's, it's not the right time to do that. And as prioritizing an attitude of face-saving instead of, going deep into debates. There's a class I'm teaching now called Global Islam Current Debates, where I teach my students to go into debates that early Islamic scholars within the religion themselves, they debated each other, like argued with love with each other. It was all about critical thinking all the time, and I called off a revival of that. In every faith community, we deal with our own issues first, and then it's going to be really easy for us to reach out to the other. There's a saying, an American saying, I love it, they say, hurt people hurt people. If I come to the other with a package of unsolved issues, of me, of the I, as unfinished working project, I can't really sit on the table and solve issues from the others. So it starts with the I first, and then we can have a better communication with the other, which I see coming, and I'm hopeful for the future. Inshallah, as we say here.
I would like to add just one thing, and that is I was starting to say this and then I sort of got off track. In a true democratic society where minorities are truly protected and we feel protected, there is more room for dialogue, discussion, and understanding. In a society where minorities are not protected, there is all kinds of opportunities for people, for whatever reasons, because they're unhappy with themselves, feeling that they don't get a good enough grade in their own life, to take out their frustrations and vent on people who are not protected. So we need to push for increased democracy. So in this world that we live in today, still, it's better than in most pre-modern times. There were some exceptions, but for the most part, it's better. And that gives me hope, because we can continue this, but we need also to note, and this is a little bit negative now, is that prejudice and misunderstandings of minority communities easily become embedded in the culture. And when that happens, it's very hard or virtually impossible to rid the culture of the problem. For example, and I'm going to pick on Christian Western culture now, but that's just as an example. Okay, this is not the guilty party. Everybody is guilty of this. In Western culture in general, antipathy toward Jews, anxiety about Jews, is deeply embedded in the culture. Stereotypes are deeply embedded in the culture. You cannot get rid of them. You cannot remove Shylock from the canon of Shakespeare. So that negative image that is directed against Jews in general through the image of the Shylock becomes part of the English language. It's part of our culture. So we always need to fight against it. The anti-Islam fear, anxiety that resulted from the success of Islam in the face of what many Christians thought was going to be a Christianization of the entire world was absorbed into Christian culture in general, and it's perpetuated through writings and theologies and literature and music and song. So you can't get rid of it. So we always have to keep educating against it, right? We don't even know that we pick up these views of ourselves. And anti-Christian animus in Jewish tradition is also embedded there because of history. And so we grow up feeling it. And I remember as a little boy thinking that I was going to get, I was going to be rewarded when I went to synagogue as a little boy. And I I said something negative about Christianity, and I thought this was going to be, I was going to be rewarded. How did I? And thank goodness my teacher said, no, that's not a nice thing to say. This is not true. So I had no idea that I was picking it up. Certainly wasn't in my family, but somehow in my life, even without reading texts from my tradition. So we have that. We have anti-Jewish, anti-Christian animus that's embedded in Islam because of historical reality, not because Islam is anti-Semitic or anti-Christian, but because it's part of our history. So we always need to be aware of it, and we always, I think, to be realistic, we always have to know that this is a constant, I don't want to use the term battle, but that's what it is. It's a constant, we need to constantly invest time in being aware of these issues and working against it. Just as we have for all other minorities, gender relations between men and women, different kinds of men, different kinds of women. This is part of our life, and we need to be aware of it to make ourselves live in a better world.
When we do find ourselves heading down these less healthy paths in our relations, how can we course correct towards something better?
This will give me a time to think.
If we find ourselves heading down less healthy paths in our relations are sour, how do we course correct? How do we turn back from that? How do we turn towards healthier relations?
Yeah, I have two questions. I think it can be answered on the personal level and the community level. I think the assumption that the norm is for things to be easy is misleading. Even with raising kids, we need to tell them that it's going to be hard, it's going to be tough. So it's very normal arguments, disagreements are there to stay at sometimes. We don't have to end every argument by me and you agreeing on one point. We can keep the disagreements going on, but we disagree with love, with respect, and it's the norm. So it's as simple as that. It's going to be tough, it's going to be hard, but we can do it.
Thank you. I agree with you entirely about this, 100%. I would like to add one more thing, and that is that when someone is engaging in an an Islamophobic act, and a Muslim stands up and complains about it and says that's not right, that has very little impact, because of course they're going to stand up. But if a member of my community, the Jewish community, does something that is anti-Islamic, Islamophobic, and I as a Jew stand up and I say this is not right, that has an impact. Much, much greater impact. Of course, it's natural that a member of the community that's affected will complain and stand up and say this is not right. But when your own community stands up and says it's not right, then that means something. And I think that is something that we need to do more often. We need to call out our beliefs of our own religious communities when they are doing something that is not right. We need to have the strength and perhaps support from our own community to do that, and to do it sometimes publicly.
What is an example from your study of the Quran that gives you particular hope for interfaith relations? Maybe one that people are not particularly familiar with, or maybe one people are familiar with, but that resonates particularly with you for hope.
So in my academic career, I was always going after problematic topics. So I remember in my first book, what is called by many the most problematic verse in the Quran, 434, is a verse misunderstood as giving husbands a license to beat up their wives as a marital punishment. Many people believe in that. I wanted in my first book to go after that to investigate. No, I'm not the first or the last person to do that. But long story short, divorce has nothing to do with marriage. 3 recommendations, 2 congregations to authority for 3 criminal punishments, female criminals in the society. Suggestions, no more than that. Similarly, when it comes to interfaith dialogue, in my 3rd book, the other verse, which is, I believe, 9:5, is even named or nicknamed the sword verse. And it's considered, it's used by Islamophobes all the time. Like, part of it says, kill them wherever you find them. And it seems, and it's quoted by radicals in the same way it's quoted by Islamophobes, it seems as if giving license to bad guys to go after infidels, anyone who doesn't believe in Islam, and to take their lives. I also try to investigate, and this is my passion. I'm not the only person doing that, and scholars are doing that. And again, it's because if that verse, this understanding is correct, it's gonna not only, you have an individual problem, it's gonna contradict the rest of the Quran, which stands for this global interfaith community, and which also contradicts another verse, the verse we quoted, Luke, La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in religion. This is another verse in the Quran. So again, long story short, the verse is about a local group of the polytheists who betrayed a treaty, a peace treaty with a local group. We're talking about both groups, contemporaries of Prophet Muhammad, and it was given a permission to go after them because they broke the treaty and they killed the Muslims. So it's not like this, as some people, I would say, misinterpret the verse as giving a license, a global license for Muslims to go after anyone they can call infidel or someone who doesn't agree to their faith. So with that, let's go back to the beginning. Maybe problems are generations after generations of problems in both documentation or interpretation. There is always hope. So I'm giving those examples out of hardcore problematic verses, and I take both to be the most 2 problematic verses in the Quran. The rest is less than that. So if we can really put our heads together and really, but we need to be, as you mentioned, Rabbi Reuven, we need to be brave within our communities. Not because a medieval scholar said this and that, we need to follow that. The Quran shames on people, the Quran is big on critical thinking and thinking and reflection. The one shame that the Quran takes against people that they don't think enough, they don't reflect enough, which means ijtihad or reasoning, intellectual reasoning, is a responsibility including us, the way it included prestigious medieval scholars. So it's an ongoing process, but from those samples, there's nothing unresolvable. And I'm talking about my faith, and I'm sure it's the same case for all faiths.
Reuven, a similar question for you. What is an example from your studies, particularly historical studies, that gives you hope? Not necessarily a rose-colored view and so forth, but what is something from history that really gives you hope for relations that we can look to encourage us?
Well, thank you for the question. If you look at when you look at history and you study history, you have your antenna out as a historian, and you focus on things that are of interest to you, the topics that are grabbing you, and you follow them through. And whenever anyone looks at history, they focus their antenna on a narrow, usually on a narrow topic. The long durée of history, the big picture of history, is just too complicated. So we sometimes, not only historians, but most people when they look at history, we are learning summary slogans about history, what happened in history. And it's usually much more complicated than that. So when someone is concerned, if a person in my community, for example, is concerned about Jewish-Christian relations, and then they may study all the negativity in Jewish-Christian relations, and there were lots of them. And they will write that it was really horrific, because you can chronicle cases in every generation. We're talking about continents, right? So in every generation there were cases of anti-Jewish problems, sometimes violent. You could find them if you look for them. But there are also lots of cases of absolute compassion and moving across boundaries and helping one another. And you have to look for them too. And that gives me hope, because we're now learning more about, among a certain cadre of scholars, looking at the positive signs of relationships and the real occurrences and the real happenings where people really assisted and really helped one another. And we have sometimes family traditions that are going back to some occurrence that happened. And that gives me hope. If you haven't had to, which is from the get-go kind of negative, and you're presuming the worst, then that's what you find when you look at the details. But when you're open to the possibility that things might be different, this is where historical scholarship then becomes innovative and interesting. You open to new ways to see things, then you see things that might have been overlooked for many years. They might have been overlooked because they don't fit a narrative of negativity. Right? We always feel, many of us feel better when we can prove to ourselves that the other group is not as good as ours. We feel better about ourselves, right? And so that is such an intuitive response in so many levels that influences scholarship as well. And it gives me hope that we're kind of transcending that today and seeing a lot more goodness in those relationships.
So we're going to, in just a moment, start taking those questions. I want to give you all kind of a heads up to finalize or write down any more questions and pass them off to Ronnie here. But while you're doing that, I'm going to give you a moment here. I'm going to give each of you a chance to ask the other if there's a particular question that you want to do as a follow-up to some of the ones you made earlier, or anything else that you are curious about.
Can I ask a nosy question? Your current projects, or because I'm a big fan of your scholarship, you mind sharing with us? You have a current project or something you're writing or preparing for? I know it's a super nosy question, but you gave me the license to ask.
Thank you. You need to. I just finished a project, and it's now in press. It's been a project I've been working on for more than 15 years, and I've spent really many years working on this. I've been collecting every reference or allusion to Muhammad in Jewish literature, pre-modern Jewish literature, from the 9th century to the modern period. And this is found in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Judeo-Arabic. And I've then organized the material by genre and written essays about it. And so I wanted to find out about Jewish views of Islam through the notion of the Prophet Muhammad. And it's polemics. But it's very interesting. Mostly negative, but not all. And it's written in code, because as a minority community, both in the Muslim and the Christian worlds, Jews couldn't write polemics publicly. If you were protected by the Sultan or the Caliph or the king or the noble or the bishop, sometimes they would even pay you to write polemics against their enemies or against their perceived enemies. And then you were protected. So Christians wrote negatively about Muslims and Jews and other Christians who didn't share their position. And Muslims wrote negatively about Christians and Jews and other Muslims who didn't share their position. And they were protected. Jews also wanted to write negatively about Muslims and Christians and Jews that didn't hold their position. They wrote about Jews that didn't hold their position because it wasn't dangerous. But they couldn't write about Christians and Muslims. So most Jewish polemics in the Middle Ages were written in code. So Muhammad is not named. Jesus is not named. Because it was just too dangerous to do that. So this is a controversial topic. I wouldn't normally simply make a public statement about it. It's a scholarly work. It's very large. I have all the text in the original languages and in the original script that it's in. Most of the Arabic is actually in Hebrew letters because that was the way the Jews wrote Arabic in the Middle Ages. But sometimes they wrote also in Arabic letters, and so that's what I'm working on. It's a very sobering but very interesting phenomenon. And then there were Jews in the Middle Ages who wrote about Muhammad who said he was a prophet, not to the Jews, but he was a prophet to the Muslims, and that's not a problem. Right? So that's my most recent project, and I will put you on the spot and ask the same question.
Congratulations, you said it's in the press now.
Yes.
Congratulations, I'm happy with my nosy question. So currently, I'm working on a translation project with Professor Simon, who is my mentor, and we're doing a translation of Muhammad al-Shibri Islam. And this is my first attempt to do translation, which is, I'm realizing it's very hard. It's taking all my time. At the same time, looking into the seerah, the life story of Prophet Muhammad from the Quran. So what if we try to write based on the Quran, our own approach to Prophet Muhammad? So I'm working on that as well, but currently it's more, until I'm done with the translation project, which is very hard, so then I'll do more progress with the other one.
So I was taking a brief preview here of some of these great questions. Let me start with
An easy one, please.
yes.
Yes or no?
What's your favorite color?
Oh, well, this is technically a yes or no. Do you agree that the three religions believe in the same God?
It is yes.
That's an easy one. Absolutely. Yeah, if there's one God and three different people of three different faith traditions believe that there is one God, they must be referring to the same God. That's kind of logical, right? We may imagine God differently, but even within our own traditions, we have our own theologies that imagine God differently. So I think when anyone says they worship an evil God or something like that person, frankly, I don't like to be, I like to be nice, but that person has no idea, no clue what they're talking about. That was easy. Keep those up.
Well, that might be doing yes and no. I swapped it out in here, but let's see where we can go from there. How do we move away from us against them thinking and move towards peace?
I think that's easy too. Get to know your neighbors. Right? Humanize them, get to know them. Talk to your shopkeepers, talk to the people that come to your house, talk to people when you go to their house. Learn about them. If you, introduce yourself. Find things in common. We have so much more in common than we have that divides us. We're all human. We all live in this world together. It's always a struggle. It's a struggle for everyone. Yeah. But sometimes it's not easy. It's an easy answer, but not always easy to do. Probably because of anxiety.
I love this question, otherness, a huge problem of the other versus me, or knowing me as the opposite to the other. Another course I'm teaching now is love in the Arabic culture, where along with the students we go into dissecting and trying to analyze and understand this human experience of love. And love could be personal, I versus you, the other, or could be between communities or interfaith communities. So with love, what's fascinating with love, so it's a journey from the I, however this I, to the you, and again it could be a community or a personal, to come back to myself through the you, leaving myself as an ego, coming back to myself as an enlightened, authentic self. This is the journey. So the I and the you together is what makes this relation of love, right? And there's a quote from Rumi I'm going to share with you. I've shared it maybe twice before in public talks. I know it's kind of addictive to do it this time, but it summarizes the idea of love and our understanding of love as a human experience, right? It says, one went to the door of the beloved and knocked. A voice asked, who is there? He answered, it's I. The voice said, there is no room here for me and you. The door was shut. After a year of solitude and deprivation, the man returned to the door of the beloved. He knocked. A voice from within asked, who is there? The man said, it's you. The door was opened for him. You see what I mean now? I don't have to explain it because Rumi does it in such a beautiful way.
Thank you. So this one is more complex.
You take the mic.
So this is a follow-up on regarding having arguments and going home as friends. Some people make a distinction between arguments about policies or practices versus arguments about identity. James Baldwin's famous quote, paraphrase here, we can disagree and continue to get along unless your disagreement is rooted in denial of my humanity and my right to exist. Do you see after dialogue of someone's arguing against Muslim, Jewish, or Christian identity in itself? Or is there another way forward in that case?
That's a great question, and I feel fine responding to it. Some people you cannot talk to. Some people are simply, their mind is made up, and we can't win all our battles. So that's fine. I feel sorry for the person who must have had a background that made it difficult for that person to realize that humanity needs someone else. And that's, I'm sure that person is suffering, but I cannot solve that person's problems. So there's enough work to do among people who either are simply ignorant or are open and have not had an experience. There's plenty to do. And when the environment, when the soft and the easy ones are on our team, you create an environment which is more conducive for this, and that will eventually trickle down even to the more difficult ones. So yeah, I think that there's no reason, I think, to make ourselves crazy. We cannot solve everyone's problems everywhere.
I agree with you, the question is sophisticated, and I'm going to provide a simple answer. I apologize for the person who, because it's going to be a low-level answer to a complex and a great question. Something I always share with my students, we need to stop dealing with religion as if we're cheering up for our teams against the other teams. We need to stop that. Like, there's nothing that makes no sense for me like interfaith debates. It's my religion against your religion. Because here's the thing, with monotheistic Abrahamic religions, at the end of the day, we're speaking about the same God. We're speaking about an idea of God as a just God. We don't have this idea of a mean God or like some of Greek gods having jealousy and fighting with each other. So what would the debate, okay, you won the debate, okay? So what would the debate, it feels good, right? It feels good. But what does that say about your own God? Because the Abrahamic monotheistic God is a just God. He's a God who shares truth equally with all his children, right? He's not a God who will save a specific group against the other groups or withhold information from the other groups. The God, the Abrahamic monotheistic God, is not a tribal God, is not an ethnic God. He's the God of the humanity. Therefore, we need to stop these useless debates and we need to stop it immediately. Maybe it's the psychological appeal, right? I'm right, you're wrong. And there is also what is the force of me being wrong. Usually when a faith community, they say, I'm wrong about this, this requires a change. We need to change something. We need to fix something. We need to apologize about something. But when I just point at the other community, or even within the faith community of the other group, and I say you're wrong, so what? I can say you're wrong and go home. You know, I sleep comfortably. I feel pity for you, bad for you, and that's it. Therefore, we resist acknowledging our own problems, because this requires a change. Feeling remorse, having a plan to change, and working on it. And therefore, many people resist it. But at the end of the day, going back, if you're really a faithful believer in God, you won't accept to portray him as a biased, evil God for your group to be the best. Doesn't make sense in Abrahamic monotheistic traditions.
Thank you. Another question is, do you believe all religions believe in the same end? I wonder if this is perhaps asking like that they are different paths to the same goal, end, or how would you understand religions in relation to each other?
There is a verse, I'm going to speak as a Muslim, like there's a verse in the Quran, it clearly says, outlines the criteria for salvation. It's believing in God, believing in the day of the judgment, and doing righteous deeds. That's it. It doesn't speak about a specific path, religion, sect within a religion. The other thing I know this is interfaith dialogue, but once we go with dividing each other and hating each other, it's go within schools into the same faith. So it's endless. Once you go there, it's endless. And therefore, when we go back now to religious texts, we see it's dominated, but this is what I see in the Quran. The criteria, literally, and I'm quoting a verse from the Quran, to believe in God, you can't deny God in your life, intentionally. To believe in the day of judgment, because otherwise, this is a personal belief, life won't make sense, it's not fair. You can tell there should be another chapter. Many questions, like the question of evil, for example. Many questions, big questions in religions won't make sense without having the second chapter. And the last one is to do righteous deeds. And this doesn't speak for specific sect, religion, school. It speaks only for what you believe and what you do. And it's general enough to fit all of us.
I don't know what all the religious traditions think about the end time. We're talking about the end time, right? What happens at the end time, or after death, or?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm reading the question. So
could you read it one more time?
Sure, certainly. Do you believe all religions believe in the same end? If I'm reading this correct.
I don't know. I think I'll stop there.
No, not that one.
Having a hard time.
I have no idea. I'm not an expert on the Baha'i faith. So I don't know.
Here we have a public example of a Jew and a Muslim agreeing with one another.
So the question that occurs to me also is a follow-up to that one about the hands. It's not related, but it made me think of one. One of my former teachers, who was who's Muslim and a scholar of Islam, when talking about inclusive aspects of the Quran, mentioned something I found really intriguing. I find resonance within Judaism, Christian Islam to this concept. He made the argument that for anyone to condemn someone else, to say they could speak for certain what that person's end would be, right? That person was destined towards eternal punishment, for example, is actually committing the sin of taking on God's role of judgment. And similarly within Judaism and within Christianity, there's these warnings of not trying to make ourselves taking on the role of God. I wondered if you could explore that a little bit more within Islam, within Judaism. Just what do you think of that? Is that an idealization when we are taking to such certainty? It reminds me of something a rabbi once said to me that his uncle said to him as a kid. He said, Michael, if anyone ever tells you they know the whole truth about something, run like hell because they're lying.
Yeah, I think that, I think I mentioned this at the beginning. One of the things that I admire about Islam is the emphasis on humility. I think it's very important in Islam. It's also important in Judaism. Not that everybody is humble, but the emphasis on the importance of humility to know that we are just flesh and blood. I think that's really the essence of when you really understand the depth of the spiritual essence of us as people, is that on the one hand, we are really great because we're created, we think, we feel things, we can articulate, we can contribute, we can help. We're very powerful in our small sphere of influence, but we're really just humans, we're just animals. And I don't mean that in a negative sense of animalistic animals, but we're just flesh and blood. And my understanding, certainly in my understanding of the traditions, is there should be a lot more emphasis on our religious teachings that we have in all three of our traditions on the importance of humility. And why that was neglected, I understand. I think because there's fear and anxiety and anger, and when going into psychology like this, I don't want to try to do that. But I would like to go back to the humble, I don't know, and that we don't have the answers.
Thank you. I like your question and the way you framed the question. It seems as if you have the answer in the question itself. So from an Islamic perspective, to judge, to condemn someone, and we're talking about now, let's say outsiders, let's say they turn kafir or infidel, someone who denies the existence of God altogether, right? So who has the right to do that? In the Quran, it's very interesting that the term, the plural from infidel, kuffar, is used in the Quran the same way to refer to farmers. Why? Because they cover seeds in earth or under dirt. So an infidel in the Quran or a kafir is someone who knows the truth, who they reach based on their intellectual abilities, their experience, what they were exposed to. They reach to the belief that there is God, but they choose to deny it or to be paid to falsify it. So it's intentional. It's very ironic that in the Quran, no one becomes a disbeliever before becoming a believer first. See what I mean? So it's, I always tell students, God doesn't punish for ignorance. He punishes for arrogance. So I'm going to give you, I'm a simple woman. I'm going to give you a simple example. Someone lives in the West. They were raised in a good family. All what they heard about religions are bad stuff. Islam and other religions. And they chose to stay away from all of that. Do we really think that God will judge them? Or they have the label of kafir? Kafir in the Quran is someone who knows this is the truth, but I don't want. Muslims are not treated the best in the West. I don't want to be with that group for any reason. So there is someone who knows this is the truth and actively goes against it and works against it. And the question is, who can know who's in the heart of someone? Many times, no one but God. And therefore, it's a faculty preserved, divine faculty. When you judge someone, you're acting on behalf of God without authorization from God. It's only God at the day of judgment who can see the hearts, what's concealed in our hearts, who can tell who was faithful and who was not faithful. We need to know the truth and deny it. Many times in the Quran we have verses, they were telling the lies while knowing they're doing that. Another shallow example, take a scientist, they're really poor, hard believers, there's no God. And this is based on their data and evidence. I don't know if there's data for that or evidence for it, but anyway, I don't think they can be taken accountable as long as they're thinking they're doing their best. I know it's very controversial. I know. This was a paper presentation I shared once with Manchester University online conference. Therefore, I'm excited about answering it. So it's a divine faculty preserved only for God to sort out who's an infidel and who can be judged or not for us.
And I have one final question for both of you. What would be one takeaway for all that are here and watching from afar that you'd like them to consider for what maybe they can do or ponder as we try to engage in more constructive interfaith relations? What's one thing that the person who's not the full-time scholar, the full-time interfaith worker and so forth, what's just something, a simple start perhaps?
I'm going to keep it short. We're addressing the right audience. You showed up here for a reason. People interested in listening to this or in the future in listening to this for a reason. Organizers of these events are doing that for a reason. The seed is already there. This is the right group, right crowd. Let's take care of that seed, all of us together. There is hope, especially when I'm addressing a crowd like this crowd.
Thank you. It's a good question. I would say, speak to your brethren first. Speak to people in your own tradition. As a couple of people get together and support one another in reaching out to people of other traditions. Don't let an insult remain without calling it out. And you could it's the small things that really make a difference and can bring people into our club. We're creating a trans-religious, syncretistic, evil club of people who are friends with one another across religious boundaries. I take away the evil part and the syncretistic part. But, and it's so rewarding, and I'm sure everyone is here partly because you've had some experiences that were positive. And let's work with our own brethren, with our own kind to help move it forward. That's easier than moving across boundaries. But then, once we feel more comfortable, continue to move across boundaries as well. And then get to know the neighbor. That I think is so important.
please join me in thanking Reuven and Abla. And I just want to let you know on the remaining couple of things, opportunities for this Bridges of Understanding event. One is this evening at 6 to 7 over at Temple Israel for the Shabbat service. Rabbi Reuven Firestone, who is a scholar in own right and is also the wife of Reuven, will be speaking at the Shabbat service. If you're not able to attend in person, you can go to Temple, look up Temple Israel Omaha, go to their website, and I believe they do Facebook streaming as well for that.
Zoom and Facebook.
Zoom and Facebook. Good, thank you, thank you. And then in addition, also on Sunday morning from 10 to 11 for Countryside Community Church's Sunday service, Reuven will be speaking from the pulpit there on the topic of faith and truth. You can also go to Countryside's homepage, and they do have live streaming from there if you look for live worship listed towards the top. They might also do it on Facebook as well. I don't recall. YouTube? Okay, on YouTube as well. But certainly if you just Google Countryside Community Church Omaha, go to the homepage and there will be a link on the top. So thank you again for coming today.